Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. If you're watching or listening to this program, I urge that you hit the like or the subscribe button on whatever platform you happen to be using. Well, it is over in what I would describe as one of the more remarkable political comebacks in U.S. history and one of the more stunning defeats for one political party. The American people have spoken. Not since Richard Nixon has the presidential nominee of one party been defeated and then come back to win the presidency. And Nixon took 8 years to do that. Donald Trump took just one term. But it wasn't just the presidency. The Republican Party, who many felt was in shambles after the 2020 and 2022 elections, made a major comeback as well, taking the Senate and possibly holding on to the House. Why all of this happened is coming up in this post-election edition of Trunk and Tales. With me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as the state attorney general and as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Tom Corbett now teaches law at Duquesne University. Also with us is Jim Byrne. Jim is the chairman emeritus of the state Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. Jim also served in county and city governments. He practices law now. Also joining us is Keith Schmidt. Keith served as the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also served on the election committee for Rick Santorum in 2012. And Keith has his own consulting firm. Also joining us is Joe Mystic. Joe, of course, his background includes consulting Democrats across the state and also in serving in city government. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts about life and politics every Sunday in the Tribune Review. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Do you have anything to talk about today at all in this post-election analysis?
Why are we even here?
I think Joe has a lot to write about for this weekend.
You think so?
I think I have a lot to write about for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I won't be scratching for topics,
I doubt very seriously. President Biden in his post-election remarks summed it up well. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chose one or the other. We accept the choice that the country made. And while Democrats are saying they accept the will of the people, behind the scenes and publicly, the finger pointing is now robust and it is underway. Pennsylvania was a state the Harris campaign had to win, and it lost it. Jim, as the former state party chairman for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, what happened?
Well, yeah, first of all, congratulations to all the winners up and down the ballot. This is how it's supposed to work. Now we have to study the film. What you won't hear over here is recounts or, any allegations. It is what it is. Let's move ahead. Let's study the film. What happened? If you look, we're still in the process of doing that. I don't want to be too speculative, but when you look at what we used to do over my shoulder here, the 67 county strategy, you would close the margins in the T. You would go out there and do the retail. I saw that happening. I saw them up and down the 79 corridor. They practically lived here since they put that ticket together. But where did the miscommunication or where did the inability to connect take place? Because generally speaking, not just in PA, but in these other battleground states, and they all went red. And I think when we look at their film and our film, there's probably going to be a lot of matchup. But what happens when you have President Trump? I have Governor Corbett on the mind because I owe him a phone call. So you have Donald Trump here in 2020, and you have Joe Biden here. Okay, so now here we are in 24. Donald Trump's here. Kamala Harris is here. He stayed here. We dropped off. Was it because 100 days or 90 days wasn't enough? Some of the observations everybody's made here felt like it was forced maybe. And as hard as she tried to work to distance herself, especially towards the end from an unpopular president, whether he deserves to be unpopular or not is a different story. Maybe there just wasn't enough time. Maybe, and the progressives are talking about this, they didn't feel the connectivity or enough genuineness in the things that the party and others were saying about addressing their needs. Perhaps in part also to the extreme left, the position with Palestine, Gaza, and Israel. These things, I think, as we start to look at this, Stacey, are going to manifest. One thing I said this in 16, I'll say it again now. There has to be a reckoning here. Whoever didn't see the leaves, forget. I'm not looking at the polls. Those on the ground with the micro-targeting who ignored warning signs like they did in 16, I said it then and I'll say it now. Do not let the cadavers in the room to do the autopsy. Do not. Let's just figure out what happened and how to fix it. Or we're going to be sitting outside for a very long time.
Well, I would say this was a very surprising result. Not only the number of states that went red, the battleground states that went red, but even down ticket. And yes, she had only 107 days, but she was part of the administration. I think this election reflected a feeling of those people in the middle who were saying, you really don't represent what we want. And that middle moves back and forth, as you well know, Jim.
Yes.
You don't represent what we want. And I made an observation to a friend of mine the other day. Maybe all the rock stars that were coming out and performing with her, they all felt good about themselves and they thought that they had this one, I think. And they were doing it in their territory rather than trying to do it maybe somewhere where they may get some more of the moderate or right-leaning moderates to come over. And one person told me this the other day. They said, most of the people don't care who Beyonce supports in an election. They like her music, but they don't care about her politics. And that seemed to be, in the last 2 weeks of the election, one of the big parts of getting the crowds out. Jim, you're well known for your ground game. They didn't get the ground game out.
They did not. They did not. And there was apathy there. And the question is why. I think to the narrative, Governor, that you just shared some of the things that I said, not enough time, a feeling of not enough connectivity or no genuine connectivity. You do that coordinated campaign, you identify, maintain the relationship, make sure they come to vote. You identify, the maintaining of the relationships, I think, where we're going to see the breakdown. People didn't feel like it was a true connection.
If I can just add this, I think the electorate had a connection with Biden when Biden ran. I don't think they ever had the connection with the vice president, nor did they get it in the last 107 days.
That's where you're going to see a lot of the that's where you're going to see a lot of our troubles are going to pop up on that portion of the analysis. I agree, Gov. I think that's where we're going to see it.
Joe?
Well, Jim had mentioned a communication problem, and certainly, there's plenty of evidence of that. Because of Joe Biden and the vice president Harris casting the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, they actually saved the Teamsters pension fund, which was going down the drain. So all those Teamsters have a pension now, and otherwise they would not have had a pension. But all signs indicate that the Teamsters went the other way in this race, that the Teamsters supported Trump. So, if you can't communicate that effectively, then you have to reassess things. Now, both parties have had a communication problem here. Look, some of my traditional Republican friends are just as disappointed as the Democrats are, because they thought maybe they were going to get their party back if Trump had lost this. And as a matter of fact, their party may be, as they knew it, may be a distant memory pretty soon. So there are a couple losers here in terms of party politics. I think everybody has to reassess. I've seen a lot of articles that said that this is who we are as Americans these days. That we're mean spirited. We engage in name calling and gutter politics, and things have changed in the American way of life. I don't believe that. I believe that this is a momentary turn, and it's an honest momentary turn by an electorate that feels like they've been neglected. They want a guy. They wanted a president who's going to walk into a room and knock over all the furniture. That's what they wanted. That's what they got. And sometimes you got to knock things down before you can build them back up.
Well, I agree with all the analysis thus far. It's pretty spot on. Um, I do believe that in 2020, we know that certainly cognitive issues have fallen the president, and he has, there's some issues why he chose to step aside, and rightly so. He made the right decision for his party and for America. But 4 years ago, Joe Biden was a different force. He was a force. He was a almost 40 plus year senator in leadership, chairing major committees, including the spirited judiciary, a very hands-on partner with with President Obama, and a consequential vice president during that time, building bridges to unions and other things that you need to develop over time. And Obama didn't have that time. He did. So make no mistake, he was formidable in 2020 at a time when we were coming out of COVID and other issues where there were some unsettling things in America that you might be looking to change, which they obviously did. But I say all this because the gov's right. I mean, there are two different candidates. We were always doing comparisons between 20 and 24, and although the popular vote wasn't close in 20, the electoral college was. So you just had to make certain adjustments. And one of the adjustments that unfortunately the Democrats didn't make is maybe with the standard bearer. I mean, you can't. It's unfair almost to compare the career of the sitting vice president with the current president at the time when he had all his faculties, and his stock was very high. And although I worried about a close election in the closing weeks, I said I felt a momentum. I thought the momentum was shifting, and I thought that there could be an election night win. And one of the reasons, and I gave three of them, but I only outlined the one that I think is pertinent to this conversation, is I think there were too many people in the base for the vice president that were there because of a hatred or disdain for the former president. There wasn't enough people voting for Kamala Harris. There were people voting against Trump, and that's an intensity issue. And although it was a big election, it was a big election on 2 or 3 points. It wasn't they were winning the? We didn't win these swing states by 10. We won them on the margins. We won every one of them, but we won on the margins. And the margins could be intensity. And in the 44 years I've been at this business, give me a candidate to vote for, and I'll win. If you're relying on people voting against, the intensity changes, the willingness to stand on a long line or even engage, you might leave it up to somebody else. But if you force somebody, you're going to make sure you get out there and pull that lever or fill in that dot to make sure that your favorite candidate wins. So different candidates the last two, and I think it made the difference. And if I could ramble just one more, because I want to talk about this, I'm going to throw a question out here. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how much do you lay at the feet of the sitting president? That I don't want to overdo it. Were they perpetrating a fraud like he wasn't doing well for a long time? They got away with it, and then he was exposed at the debate. But I know there's a lot of my Democratic friends are thinking two things. One, if it had got out sooner and allowed a primary to take place to choose a multitude of candidates and nominate somebody, the outcome could have been different. Or if he got out completely and allowed her to serve the last year as a president, because and give her that mantle, it could have been different too. So there are some people that said that's all we can do with 100 days left. We had to give it to her. We had to make it by acclamation, but it kind of put her behind the 8 ball.
I in life and in politics, when you fail, I don't think it's useful to start pointing a finger at others. When you fail, I think it's time to look inward. She had a certain hand dealt to her. It wasn't a strong hand, albeit. And she did I think, a spectacular job with what she had to work with. Think of what she did in that short period of time. and how she rallied the troops, I think, as best as they could be rallied. There's a lot to consider here. But had it been her or another Democrat like her, a prominent Democratic candidate who got the nod, we still would have faced this same disgruntled electorate, this discouraged electorate, these folks that don't want to recognize those who've done great things for them, because they're looking at what's not been done for them. They're looking at the attention they've not received, and they're fed up, and they were willing to go with a guy that maybe they don't even like. When you look at the women voters with this guy and the Hispanic voters with him after his history, you wonder how that could be. Well, they're going with somebody who's going to wreck the joint and tear it down, and we'll start from scratch.
I'm not quite sure I agree with all of that, Joe. And I'll put it this way. Nobody has really talked about this, and that is poll after poll that I've seen, or post-election polls or surveys, indicate that the working person, the middle America type person, felt that the Democratic Party was not listening to what he or she needed in that area.
I think that's what I said, Stace. Yeah, I agree.
Well, maybe I missed that part. Then I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, that's what I'm saying. They felt like they weren't being heard.
Right.
And they've also felt like they weren't being heard by the traditional Republican Party.
Hence, you certainly didn't
Trump.
There it is.
You certainly didn't lack the resources to articulate a message.
Oh, absolutely.
You broke every record. You outspent us 6.5 to 1. So at some point, it is fair to say, were you selling someone that isn't attractive to the American people or the American electorate? And maybe that's unfair to say that, but when you spend 6.5 times and can't buy it, then you have to look at the choice you made.
Traditional Democrat in today's parlance of what a traditional Democrat is. And I think the people rejected that, just as they rejected traditional Republicans when they chose Trump the first time and this time. It's they don't want tradition anymore. Tradition hasn't served them well, I think, is what they're saying.
Well, I also think
let's break this trend. Let's start over.
I also think that her comment on The View, when she was asked, what would you do differently than the president right now? And she responded, I really can't think of anything I would do differently.
Right. Well,
I think because let me finish here. Yeah. And that's because whether, the administration realized it or not, the American people have been and are hurting because of inflation. The Fed today just lowered interest rates again by 1/4 of a point. So it goes back to perhaps maybe the best political philosopher of our time, James Carville, saying it's the economy, stupid. I mean, and that's really, I think, what this race came down to.
Well, she had the Hubert Humphrey problem.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
How does a vice president run against her president? I mean, that doesn't work. Okay.
No, Humphrey, I don't want to go back and give history lessons here, but toward the end, he finally did try to cut the ties with Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. But it was too late.
Yeah, right. And not definitively, not as harshly as the electorate would have liked, and it was too late.
Yeah. It's bizarre when you look at history and how many failed from the vice president. I mean, only a couple, 2 or 3 in the last 150 years. And you would think that would be the mainstay. Like it's like being attorney general running for governor of Pennsylvania. You would think the vice presidency is a pretty good start, but apparently that doesn't bode well in history. It's only happened 3 or 4 times in our history that transition was able to happen smoothly. So, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Jim, I want to bring this up, and maybe the governor can talk about this too, because I know you both know this gentleman. His name is Bob Brady in Philadelphia. There's a lot of consternation. In fact, as the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that the vice president's performance in Philadelphia was the lowest by a Democratic presidential candidate in the city in the last 2 decades. Since that report also, Brady has told the Philadelphia Inquirer of the Harris campaign, they didn't show us any respect. I never talked to the lady, and she's the candidate. He also said Democrats made the wrong call in selecting Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be Harris's running mate. Instead, Brady said the campaign should have called on Josh Shapiro, of course, the Pennsylvania governor right now, to join on the ticket. Now, I can give you the response from the Harris campaign if you'd like to hear that as well. because it wasn't very conducive with what he had to say.
Well, Stace, yeah,
Yep.
if you want me to answer your question, I'm going to have to hear the reply to Bob Brady's love letter to the campaign. I haven't heard it yet. I can't wait for this.
Yes. Brendan McPhillips, a senior advisor to the Harris campaign. I'm quoting now from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Brendan McPhillips, a senior advisor to the Harris campaign in Pennsylvania, said in a statement that the vice president's team, quote, knocked more than 2 million doors in the weekend leading up to Election Day, which is 2 million more doors than Bob Brady's organization can claim to have knocked on during his entire tenure as party chairman. McPhillips added, if there's any immediate takeaway from Philadelphia's turnout this cycle, it is that Chairman Brady's decades-long practice of fleecing campaigns for money to make up for his own lack of fundraising ability or leadership is a worthless endeavor that no future campaign should ever be forced to entertain again, end quote. Doesn't look like there's much harmony going on between the Philadelphia Democratic Party and the Harris campaign.
Well, it's part of the it's part of the decompression after an ass kicking. It's letting off a little bit of steam. I wish they would have sat down and had that conversation instead of throwing it out. You keep the family business back there, not out there. But I don't think anybody's surprised to hear that type of back and forth. Chairman Brady he knows where every manhole cover is in that county. He knows where the votes are. He knows that if you hang a sign in that guy's yard over there in the 18th ward, you're going to lose the rest of the ward because that guy has sued everybody in the 18th ward. So you need that institutional knowledge to be successful. And it gets back to communication, doesn't it? If what Bob says is true, that the vice president or her inner circle tried to avoid him or tried to avoid the Philadelphia Democratic Party, which is one of the last old school bastions there in Chicago, there's going to be it's going to have a negative effect because those wards are looking for, I don't care what you say, what you want. Those wards are looking for GOTV to get into their neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods wait for what the ward leaders are going to do. And if you have no communication with the ticket, you're going to have a problem. It's how it works there. Harris cannot say, no disrespect, Madam Vice President, that you didn't know how Philadelphia politics works because the president and Bob Brady are on each other's speed dial.
You have a new message.
So
Yep.
if that's how you do it, isn't it about winning? If that's what you got to do in Philadelphia, and that's what you got to do in Chicago, whether you like it or not, interact with the people on the ground. We didn't have that in 12 with the coordinated campaign because Bill Ayers, who was running Obama, hooked up with our team, Kevin Washa, our executive director, and we worked together on the roadmap. If you're in Susquehanna, you got to do this. If you're in Allegheny, you got to do this. You're over there in Philly, you're up in Erie. This is the language, and these are the folks with whom you need to speak to if you want to win. That doesn't seem to have happened here.
Yeah, something else was going on. Something else was going on in Philadelphia. Johnny Dock, who is one of the most powerful labor leaders maybe in the history of the Commonwealth, had he been on the scene, and he's had to go away for a while, but had he been on the scene, this might have turned out differently in Pennsylvania.
Explain that.
Because he has a huge organization. Very, very few politicians were as smart as he is in delivering the vote, and he has the troops that he could have put on the ground. But it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, what would it have mattered? It's like those people who are saying, "Oh, they should have chosen Josh Shapiro to be the vice," with all the additional problems that would have brought a different set of problems. Right. So what? You win Pennsylvania, you still lose. And Josh Shapiro would have squandered his opportunity to be at the top of the ticket. So none of that makes any sense.
My observation is, if this is a way a senior member of her staff treated a highly respected former congressman, leader of the Democrat Party for decades, who, as Jim mentioned, knows everybody, where to go. I don't care if he didn't knock on a door. He met everybody.
He doesn't have to.
The various meetings that they go to. He's the person they should have been talking to and say, what do we need to do in Philadelphia? But my reflection on this is sometimes when you get, campaigns are always changing, and you always get new young people coming in. And it's not unusual that they all want to make their bones in campaigns, but they don't want to learn from the past. And if you don't bother to learn from past, you're going to make mistakes that were already made one time before. Not communicating to Bob Brady demonstrates to me why they're not doing well, and partly why Casey's having a hard time in Philadelphia right now.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Stacey. This is really something to talk about because there has been this problem forever with organized parties, whether it's the GOP or the Dems, when the outside candidates come in and set up shop in our states, our neighborhoods, and our communities. The governor is nailing it. These folks come in and we don't need to work with them, or they don't need to tell us what to do. We have these cute little things that are giving me all this data, and I know where to go and hang my signs, and I know who to speak to. No, you think you know who to speak to. That's a big difference because you've never been here before. You
Stacey,
need to tap into that institutional knowledge if you want a chance to win. We were very blessed in 2012 to have the interface with Bill Ayers and the Obama team. Remember, we were in a clutch after President Obama spoke at Carnegie Mellon in the summer of 2012. There was a president, myself, Bill Ayers, Kevin Washoe, laying it all out. And they were sharing with the president the micro-targeting we were doing here. And they trusted our operation, and they knew what they needed to do. Joe Biden knew what Kamala Harris should have done. I'm sure he did. Maybe they didn't ask him. But you want to be in Philly? And how many other Bob Brady's in other states were disrespected the same
exactly.
way?
Especially some of the blue wall states. Joe, I want to hear your comment, but I just want to throw this in. Also, Brady said that, and this is backing what you and Joe have both said already, and the governor, that when Obama ran for president and when Biden ran for president, that when they were the nominees, they came to Philadelphia and they met in a room with the ward chairman of Philadelphia. And that you can read by what Brady indicates here. That means that those ward chairmen, had some enthusiasm after meeting with the presidential candidate. And if that didn't happen with Harris, you kind of wonder.
Yeah. Now, to some extent, let me raise a voice in defense of this staffer who sent that letter. It's in my style, but it appears that he committed a political faux pas, which means that he inadvertently told the truth. Politics.
Shame on him.
Politics is an enterprise in Philadelphia.
Who hired that guy?
Politics is a 365-day-a-year enterprise in Philadelphia. It's not like here, where we get involved a couple weeks before election day, for the most part, most people in any event. But when I ran statewide, they were charging you by 2-hour segments to hand out your materials at the polling places. And if you didn't pay for 4 hours, when your 2 hours are up, all your stuff went in a box and went under a table, and they pulled out the other guy's stuff because he paid for the next 2 hours. Okay, so it's a different game out there, and if you want to do well out there, you have to understand that and play the game.
One of the national pundits, I forget who it was that I saw on TV the other night, was talking about part of the problem right now with, I'm going to call it the Harris wing of the Democratic Party, is they project a sense of elitism. They didn't connect with the hardcore Democrats. They didn't connect with the working class people. Actions like that just convinces me that was a good analysis.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just a quick point to touch on how Mr. Biden and President Obama were all over Philly. This picture was taken in 2012, North Philly, and the president and and Keith, you've seen this picture because I put a copy of it in your birthday card.
Yep.
But that's us looking at Bob Brady. That picture is the two of us looking at Chairman Brady, who's right out there with his organization.
And I have to tell you, Bob Brady knows how to play both sides of the aisle too. I did a lot of work to help save the shipyard down in Philadelphia, save the refinery in Philadelphia when I was governor. And I remember one of his quotes. We were on the dais at the shipyard talking about how we arranged to make sure that it was going to be saved. And it's done a great job of building ships ever since. So that every time I'm on a dais with Governor Corbett, something good is happening for Philadelphia.
He gave you a shout out every year. My family and I would go to Wildwood. He has a place in North Wildwood. He can't wait to get out of Philly and get down there, especially in the summertime. And we always get together, have coffee, compare notes. We were down there in late July, and I mentioned you, Governor, in our podcast here. And he said, always great to work with that guy. Never refused a request. That guy is what he preferred. And please send him my very best. I mean, he always speaks very highly of you when we get together.
All right, let me change the
think-
subject here. Oh, go ahead, Keith. You haven't said anything about this yet. Go ahead.
It's hard to believe. I've been being educated by these three masters.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting stuff. But I'm going back to a early part of the conversation, and Joe mentioned something about, is it really the Republican Party, or has Trump permanently changed the direction of our party? And that's a good question. I mean, it's going to be interesting now because as he serves his second term, he'll never be on the ballot again. There's nothing that you kind of want him to succeed, I would hope, because you're not giving him credit for anything that he can use in an election in the future. He's not going to run again. So that might be an easing of it. But in some ways, not all Republicans are completely upset over him hijacking us, because to a degree he has built some interesting coalitions that didn't exist for us before, and some of it is just that last 10 minutes. I think maybe the research they were doing within the Republican ranks said Kamala Harris is no Joe Biden, and there is opportunities in certain groups that we can work where she's not as aggressive as Obama or Biden was. And that's why, when you look at those numbers they're throwing out since the election, he got 13% more Latinos than he did in 2020. He got 15% more black voters than he did in 2020. Hard to believe. Running against Kamala Harris, he did 15% better with black voters. He did 19% better with people under 30. And he's the first Republican nominee for president to ever win Latino men outright. So that's hard to believe. I mean, that's a broad coalition that never existed within the Republican hierarchy. And we have to credit Trump and his message, but we also can credit the fact that she left the door open and her team left the door open because they didn't do the hard work and the traditional stuff that her predecessors did in earlier cycles. So, it's a wash, but I think there was an opportunity and they seized upon that opportunity.
What killed Hillary in 2016? Inability to do retail and ineffective ability to make connectivity through communication. One of the reasons they couldn't do the second one was because Hillary gave off an aura of elitism. That was just, we saw that and we heard that. Now, what does Harris do? Does a shit ton of retail, excuse my language. So you fixed that, but you weren't able to bridge the communication gap based on that perception of the average Democratic voter. So they couldn't fix the second component.
Right. We're almost out of time. In fact, we're over our time already, but I do want to continue with this. At last check that I had, Dave McCormick was up around 31,000 votes over the incumbent Bob Casey for the United States Senate seat in Pennsylvania. First, will McCormick hold on to this, do you guys think, with the number of, I have no idea how many mail-in ballots are still coming in. And then secondly, the question is, if it is within that half point, I believe this triggers an automatic recount.
Recount. It won't be certified until a week from Friday.
Okay.
That's when the certification will be.
It's been Casey's been closed on it for 24 hours.
He has been.
That's not true.
But
I've been watching it. I've been watching it every hour.
And the last couple of hours,
31,000.
Yeah.
Again, it just got updated again. They both gained around 1,100 votes. I mean, incrementally.
They might have come
It tightened, though. I'll agree with him on one thing. It was more like 40-some thousand. Then it went to 30, and it's held now at 30 for like 8 hours. They both gain like 500 votes each.
Yes.
It's coming in kind of equal. And now the percentage finally changed. This is the first time it now says 99%, because it was 98% every time you look.
Wow.
So now they're saying 99% is in, and the lead, as you indicated, Stacey, is 31,000 votes.
So let me ask this question then. You guys have been in politics for a long time. You've seen recounts. Is there a possibility that you can come up with 31,001 votes in a recount to everybody shaking their head no? That's what my thought is as well.
He doesn't get about this close before the recounts triggered.
Exactly right.
McCormick will be the next senator.
Yeah. Technology has stopped the recounts from really being meaningful, I think. because all those ballots went through a machine. It's all been counted. It's not like in the old days when everybody
Right.
hand counted a written ballot, where
I needed
ballots, those days are gone. So
I needed 16 votes in Washington County about 5, 6 years ago. Couldn't find them. I mean, 16 votes. There's not a lot of movement when you recount these days. So Bob Casey better get closer. It's a coattail race. Trump had coattails. Harris did not.
Yep.
Bob
Well,
Casey
I'll tell you
did.
this. One of our panelists right here, Keith Schmidt, kept telling me over the last week that McCormick can win provided Trump takes Pennsylvania by 2% or more.
Yeah.
And I think you were dead on, Keith. You were dead on
Imagine
that
that.
one.
Absolutely.
All right, final
Blind
question.
squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
No, you're pretty
You
astute.
find them all the time.
Yeah, you're
you
all
got
of you are
a
very
good nose there, Keith.
Yeah. So this is my final question. We talked about in 2020 and 2022, where does the Republican Party go from here? So now the question is, with this, what I'm going to say, a resounding defeat for the Democrats across the country, with Trump gaining or winning the popular vote, where does the Democratic Party go from here?
Well, they have to rebuild, sharpen their message. The next resounding defeat will probably be the Republicans' resounding defeat. I mean, we know the pendulum swings back and forth constantly. So Democrats have a lot of homework to do, a lot of rebuilding to do. And, if they do it, they'll rebound sooner instead of later.
Be honest about the film. Study the film and be honest about it. And like I said, don't let the cadavers do the autopsy, because all that is self-preservation. They need to be honest about their roles, what they should have done or didn't do. It's like a coach looking at film. That guy isn't making the tackle, or that guy saw a play and he didn't execute on it, i.e. warning signs in the polling or wherever else. There has to be accountability. And in addition to fixing the message and finding a candidate that can genuinely connect, like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, President Biden. Hillary couldn't do it. And Ms. Harris, although she tried and did the retail, she couldn't do it either. Find candidates that make a connection, a real connection. People can feel like they can sit with them. The presidents I've been blessed to have met felt like you could sit and talk with them. Mr. Obama, Mr. Clinton, Mr. Biden, George W. Bush and Millville. You got to be able to have that. If you don't, it's not going to work. Find that candidate.
Let me close with this. Both sides need to work on finding candidates that are more in the middle, because this country clearly just demonstrated with this election it is more in the middle than it is in the extremes.
And getting them elected in the primary, Governor, and there may need to be some conversations about how the middle can win in the spring instead of running to the right and left to get elected.
Yep.
There's a problem that needs solved there.
I'm sure Democrats are going to evaluate their policies, their messaging, all that's important. But the way politics are consumed today, I really think they need a standard bearer. They need someone that they believe in and they could rally around. And the sooner they do that with the sitting governor of Pennsylvania, the better their fortunes.
Stace, I have one last comment.
Sure.
I just want to adopt something Jim had said earlier, at least his style of expressing himself. Sometimes you need a good ass kicking to clear your head. The Democrats have had that.
All right. We'll end it with that. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll continue our look at politics after the election with analysis of what happened in our next episode, again, probably. And also, if you are watching or listening to us on a podcast or streaming, I urge you to hit that like or subscribe button. For right now, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again in about 2 weeks for another edition of Trunk and Tales. Thanks for joining us.
Share it with your friends. Share it with your friends.
Share it, indeed.